And welcome everybody to another edition of the GSMC Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. And as always, I'm your host, Kenneth Gruenfelder. And it's great to have you guys here on this Wednesday. It is Thanksgiving Eve, and we have a lot to talk about on the show today. But before I get into that, I just want to remind you guys to tip or donate and get your comments recognized. Make sure to go to the following link. That is streamelements.com/GSMC/sportsnetwork./tip. Again, that really helps the show, makes the show more interactive between myself, the host, and you guys, the viewers. And again, it is for the link, it's streamelements.com/GSMCsportsnetwork./tip. And as always, it is displayed on the ticker on the bottom of the show segment. So, with that, let's get right into what we are going to talk about today. So we're going to start off the show by talking about something that Tom Brady has said recently, talking about today's game and how it's mediocre. So we'll get into that. Then in the second part of the show, we'll talk about some quarterbacks that have something to prove down the stretch here as we're waning down here in the regular season. There was an article that the NFL.com came out with, so I wanted to cover that and talk about the quarterbacks that they talked about in the article. Then we will preview the games for tomorrow. I'll give you what I'm leaning towards at the moment, but could be subject to change. And then we'll preview the rest of the games for the weekend. So there's going to be no show tomorrow. There's also going to be no show on Friday as well, and we'll be back on Monday. So no shows on Friday, no shows tomorrow. So yeah, that's why we're going to do all our picks right now. But they're all going to be, a lot of them could be subject to change, because injuries could pop up and things like that. So, but these Thanksgiving games are going to be tough. They really are. And I take pride in them because I've done very well on Thanksgiving. I did go 1-2 one year, but that's really it. I either go 2-1 or 3-0. And last couple of years, I've been very close to going 3-0 again, but the Giants backdoored last year. The Lions a couple of years ago did the same thing. So that wasn't the case. So we're trying to go 3-0. I don't think it's going to happen because these games are tough to pick this year, but I'm hoping for the best. So let's get right into the first topic, which is discussing Tom Brady's recent comments about the game today. Now, Tom Brady actually really hasn't been part of any topics on the show since I started doing the football podcast. His name has been mentioned here and there, but, with him retiring last year, he hasn't really, he hasn't been part of any of my segments here. So now this is a segment for him. He was talking to Stephen A., and he was saying how today's NFL, there's a lot of mediocrity. And one of his quotes was, and I pulled up an article with the quote from Yahoo Sports. He said how I think there's a lot of mediocrity in today's NFL. I don't see the excellence that I saw in the past. I think the coaching isn't as good as it was. I don't think the development of young players is as good as it was. The rules have allowed a lot of bad habits to get into the actual performance of the game. So I just think the product, in my opinion, is less than what it's been. And I don't think... And he also said, I look at a lot of players like Ray Lewis and Rodney Harrison and Ronnie Lott and guys that impacted the game in a certain way. And every hit that they would have made would have been a penalty, he said. You hear coaches complaining about their own players being tackled, and why don't they talk to their player about how to protect himself? We used to work on the fundamentals of those things all the time. Now they're trying to be regulated all the time. And listen, I agree with what he says, but I feel like for a lot of people, they're going to look at him and say, well, you benefited from a lot of these things because, Tom Brady did complain a lot, if he didn't get a call his way or, if there was a flag that should have been thrown, he'd be the first to run over to the ref and say, hey, what's the deal? There should have been a penalty, so I know a lot of people are probably going to, point fingers at him and say, you're kind of the reason for this. You look at the Tuck rule, way back when against the Raiders in that playoff game where it should have been a fumble, but it wasn't. And that kind of led to the Patriots winning. I think that was their first, that was Brady's first Super Bowl run. And Obviously, the roughing the passer penalties, have gotten ridiculous over the years because some of them you're just like, that's clearly not roughing the passer. The flags have become a problem. The penalties become a problem in the NFL. And a lot of people, question the integrity of the game, because, look at last year's Super Bowl. I mean, that was a relatively clean game all the way through. And towards the end, Juju Smith-Schuster gets held by James Bradbury, and they call the flag. And, a lot of people are like, you can't throw that flag in that situation. And people are like, well, if it's a flag, if it's a penalty, you got to throw the flag. But for me, I think, like, referees miss a lot of flags. And, the ones that they don't miss, they come in crucial moments. So you're wondering, like, why does that happen? And that, again, that's questioning the integrity of the game. And we saw that in the Super Bowl, the year before that, with the Rams and the Bengals. I mean, how many flags were thrown, when the Rams went ahead against the Bengals in that Super Bowl too? That I think that was a relatively clean game. There wasn't a lot of flags in that game, and they missed the flag on I think T. Higgins. He grabbed Jalen Ramsey's face mask or whatever, and that was on a long touchdown. And they didn't call that, but then they're throwing a million flags at the end of the game, when the Rams are driving to go and win it. Now, again, I'm not leaning one way or the other, but I'm just saying, like, that's how people perceive it. They're like, you didn't throw a flag here, but you throw a flag here. You're picking and choosing when you're going to throw penalties. And yeah, I mean, it is a different game. It's very different. I mean, because, when my parents talk about, Lawrence Taylor and, Brady brings up Ronnie Lott. I mean, Ray Lewis I saw play, towards the end of his career, but I didn't get to see his full, career because I was little. The earliest memory I have of watching football was probably 2007, which oddly enough is, the earliest memory I have when it comes to baseball too. So 2007 is really like the earliest year of memories I have when it comes to actually watching sports when I was 7 years old. But, I mean, I agree with what he's saying. It's just I feel like for a lot of people, they're going to look at him and say, well, you're not somebody we want to hear saying that because you benefit from it. I did see, though, how people said even during Brady's playing career, he said the same thing. It's just... But, hey, if you could benefit from it, if you're Tom Brady and you're like, hey, I could get a penalty thrown on this play... I can make my case. You're going to go and do that because you've earned that respect too. Which, I mean, I don't like it. Believe me, I don't like it. I don't like when players are complaining for flags if they don't get it. Even though, like, as fans, we complain if there aren't flags being thrown either. So it's just, Tom Brady's a very polarizing figure, and you either love him or you hate him. So depending on, what team you root for. But, I mean, he's right. I mean, I think when he talks about the coaching's different, I mean, I guess, because there are a lot of bad head coaches in the NFL that shouldn't be head coaches, but there's still some very good ones. I mean, the game has changed. It's very different. I mean, the thing is they emphasize player safety, but I mean, people talk about, well, they play Thursday night games, they play Monday night games. Now you got a Black Friday game. People complaining about the playing, the playing conditions. The grass versus turf debate. There's a lot of things. And I listen. I don't think he's wrong in what he's saying. I mean, player development. I think it all depends on the situation that you're in too, because. I think there's a lot of organizations that still develop players well. I mean, look at, some of the quarterbacks. I mean, look at what Patrick Mahomes turned into. I mean, sitting behind Alex Smith and Andy Reid being the coach. But I guess, but again, Andy Reid's been around for a long time, so, I mean, I don't think Tom Brady was, of course, referring to him. I mean, there's other head coaches. Again, there's a lot of head coaches in the NFL right now that should not be head coaches, and they will be gone. Um, but yeah, I mean, I understand where he's coming from. Where he's coming from, you know. Um, so I don't disagree with him, but I do agree with a lot of people when it's like, well, you're someone that benefited from penalties being thrown and things like that. Because yeah, I mean, the roughing the passer is a big thing. Unnecessary roughness. Because I mean, you used to be able to do whatever you want to a quarterback. But I remember like that one year with Clay Matthews, where he got like it was like 3 weeks in a row. He was getting rough in the passer penalties, or it was like within the first. Well, it was the first 3 weeks, and some of them were ridiculous calls. Um, but I mean, listen, they're trying to make the game safer, but at the same time too, look at how many injuries we've had this year. I mean, it's been awful. This has been one of the worst years when it comes to injuries. So many star players have gotten hurt. So how is it? It doesn't seem like player safety is really working. All these regulations, so I don't know. But again, I don't think he's necessarily wrong in what he's saying. Um, again, we'll see what the NFL does in the offseason because, I think it's very alarming when you have all these star players getting hurt. And a lot of them are non-contact injuries, so the NFL's got to do something about it. I don't know if they are going to. And I think also, and I've heard them talk about this on the radio too, it's like a lot of people don't trust the officials. That they have they're being told when and where to throw flags. Now, again, I don't want to think that's true because, like, I want to be able to just watch the game and enjoy it and not think about, like, oh, this game is going to go a certain way. But, yeah, when there are flags that are thrown and aren't thrown, that sometimes the officials really have an impact on the outcome of the game. And I think for the NFL, like, they should try to prioritize, improving how they officiate games so that this doesn't happen. But it's going to continue to happen. I mean, look at what they did, 10 years ago. The replacement officials. What a disaster that was. That was horrible. I mean, the Hail Mary was the final straw. And that's what brought the regular officials back. But the officials are still bad. And I get it. Like, you're going to miss calls here and there. It's going to happen. But, in these big games, if you let teams play relatively, the whole time, and then all of a sudden you throw a flag at the end of the game when you haven't been throwing flags, yeah, people are going to question that. Because I'll be honest, the last 2 Super Bowls, that's been the case. There have been flags thrown at the end of the game, and the team that won benefited from that. Now, that doesn't mean that they weren't penalties, but like there's some calls you missed. Let them play the whole game. And then in that moment, you decide to throw the flag. And it's like, what I think people are asking for is be more consistent. That's it. That's really what it comes down to, is be consistent. So, but yeah, that's really it when it comes to, Tom Brady's remarks. Let me know what you guys think about that. I think he's right in what he's saying, but again, he also benefited from it. So, yeah. So when we come back from our first break of the show, speaking of quarterbacks, besides Tom Brady, we are going to talk about quarterbacks that have something to prove down the stretch. We'll go through who was listed in the article, and I'll give you my thoughts on that when we come back from our first break. So stick around, and we'll be right back here on the GSMC Football Podcast.